Whoa, 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 whoa. Welcome back to the Healthy Skin Show. I'm Takashi, your healthy skin coach, helping you get clear skin and preaching to the world why food is the ultimate medicine. Yesterday, I had my first official hour-long podcast with the legendary Mabad, who co-founded Rap Genius and Everpedia. And we talked about how caffeine is inflammatory to the body. So, today I'm going to really dig into the science behind caffeine and what it's really doing inside the body. But first, I'm going to plug my new website at healthyskincoach.co. If you need help with your skin, book a free appointment with me and let's clear up your skin. Alright, so before I get into the research studies, I want to first give you a quick science lesson on inflammation. So there are certain signaling proteins that cause inflammation in the body, and inflammation is tied to pretty much every medical condition out there. And these signaling proteins are called cytokines. And here is a list of pro-inflammatory cytokines and anti-inflammatory cytokines. You'll hear me talk about these pro-inflammatory cytokines a lot because it plays a critical role in creating inflammation. So out of these list of pro-inflammatory cytokines, I talk about interleukin-1 beta a lot, interleukin-6, and TNF-alpha the most, which plays a huge role in causing inflammation that leads to other medical conditions. So in my previous videos, I talk about how Humira blocks this pro-inflammatory cytokine TNF, or tumor necrosis factor, in order to reduce inflammation in patients. And Humira is the best-selling drug in the world with $20 billion in revenues. So if I can present you alternative solutions through food and plants that reduces TNF, then I am able to help so many patients who rely on prescription drugs and have no idea that there are alternative solutions out there. And you know what? I always say that food is the ultimate medicine. So these are the inflammatory cytokines, and then here are the list of anti-inflammatory cytokines, including interleukin 4, 5, 10, 1RA, and 13. So interleukin 10 is what I talk about the most, and that plays a huge role in reducing inflammation in the body. I also talk about 4 and 13 a lot because with eczema, there is a new eczema drug called Dupixent, which actually blocks interleukin 4 and 13. And what happens is when you eat trigger foods that are inflammatory, these little food particles get into your bloodstream, most likely because you have a leaky gut. You have little holes in your intestinal lining. And your immune system starts overreacting because it thinks these food particles are antigens. And so it's sending out all these antibodies. And so when Dupixent blocks interleukin 4 and 13, even though these cytokines are anti-inflammatory, the researchers found that too much of anti-inflammatory cytokines can also trigger skin conditions like eczema. So too much of anything is bad for the body. So just like Humira tries to block too much TNF-alpha, Dupixent, this eczema drug, tries to block too much of interleukin 4 and 13, which are anti-inflammatory cytokines. Basically, we want to modulate the immune system so that it gets to a base level that's steady. We don't want too much inflammation, but we also don't want to use drugs that suppresses it below the baseline. And I talk about foods and plant medicines that help modulate the immune system and get it back to that base level. Okay, so let's look into caffeine and what it's doing with these inflammatory and anti-inflammatory cytokines. So this research study from the University of Brasilia, Brazil, titled Consumption of Coffee or Caffeine and Serum Concentration of Inflammatory Markers. And they found that there is a predominantly anti-inflammatory action by coffee, but not of caffeine consumption. And that caffeine has mixed responses, both pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory. So if you are drinking coffee for its anti-inflammatory properties, you might be better off with decaf and getting the actual benefits of coffee without the potentially harmful effects of caffeine. Another study from Harokopio University in Athens, Greece is titled Associations Between Coffee Consumption and Inflammatory Markers in Healthy Persons. And what they found was that both men and women who consumed over 200 milliliters of coffee had higher interleukin 6, which is an inflammatory cytokine, higher C-reactive proteins, which are proteins involved in inflammation, and higher tumor necrosis factor alpha, which is TNF, which is another pro-inflammatory cytokine. And they came to a conclusion that moderate to high coffee consumption increased the inflammation process. So lastly, I came across this amazing article by Dr. Will Cole, who is a leading functional medicine expert and is the best-selling author of Ketotarian and the Inflammation Spectrum. And he titled this article, The Truth Behind Caffeine and Inflammation. And he goes on to talk about how caffeine functions in the brain by interacting with a group of receptors called adenosine receptors. And when caffeine activates these receptors, it affects the brain functions, which include sleep, cognition, learning, and memory. And caffeine attaches to adenosine receptors and prevents adenosine from doing its job, which is famous for making you sleepy. So you feel more alert, you feel more awake with more energy, but different research studies show that it can have both inflammatory and anti-inflammatory effects, depending on the person and how caffeine reacts to that particular body. So for me, I'm very sensitive to caffeine. Even if I drink a little bit, I can't sleep at night because my adenosine receptors aren't doing its job properly. And when I went through my severe eczema flare-up, I found out that tea was the most reactive thing for my body. So I was drinking a ton of tea thinking it was anti-inflammatory. But in my particular case, it was actually super inflammatory. And I attribute that partly due to the caffeine inside. So Dr. Cole also talks about how each of us have different genes called CYP1A2, also known as caffeine genes, that affect our bodies differently. And we inherit one copy of this gene from the mom and one from our dads. And if you have two of the fast variants of this gene, you are a fast caffeine metabolizers along with 40% of the population. If you have one fast and one slow, you are a medium metabolizer, which makes up 45% of the population. If you have both slow versions, you are a slow caffeine metabolizer, which makes up about 15% of us. And if you're a slow metabolizer, you're more likely to be jittery and anxious after coffee, and it's associated with increased risk of high blood pressure, heart attacks, and digestive disorders. So based on my body, I would guess that I am a slow metabolizer, and that's why I was experiencing some of the digestive disorders, which reflected in my skin. You could be part of the 40% who's a fast metabolizer, so you're not experiencing the negative effects of caffeine. And according to the Harvard Health blog, coffee contains polyphenols and other anti-inflammatory compounds that protect our bodies against chronic inflammation. So again, coffee itself is good, but caffeine inside the coffee might affect your body based on your DNA and the genes that you specifically have. So Dr. Cole goes on to say that tea also have anti-inflammatory properties, and that green tea is thought to be the healthiest type because of its high levels of catechins, which are polyphenols with antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. And lastly, he talks about how you should avoid energy drinks and sodas, which are full of inflammatory sugars, preservatives, chemicals, and artificial colors that can trigger huge amounts of inflammation in the body, regardless of whether you're a slow or fast caffeine metabolizer. Okay, so I hope you learned something today. I know I learned that I'm a slow metabolizer of caffeine, and that's why it affects my body more so than the average person. Thank you for listening, and thank you for watching. Remember, guys, food is the ultimate medicine, and if you need help, visit my website at healthyskincoach.co. Alright, so stay inside, stay quarantined, and stay safe. And until next time, Taco is out!